In this video, I'm going to be reacting to the strength and conditioning training methods of unified welterweight world champion Errol Spence. So we're starting off with this very impressive stretch, not only from Errol Spence, but the therapist that's holding him as well. What's even more impressive is that this guy's actually working with Anthony Joshua and he was lifting him. So literally yesterday, I watched Anthony Joshua's YouTube video and I saw him with him on his back performing this stretch. So it's one thing doing it with the welterweight world champion, but doing it with a heavyweight as well. Incredible. This is basically trying to improve that thoracic extension of the spine, which a lot of boxers struggle with because they're quite rounded in their posture just due to their boxing stance and guard position, but also due to the anterior dominance of the sport. We're throwing thousands of punches every single session, maybe even 10,000 punches across a week. They're quite tight in thoracic extension, they're quite kyphotic, and this can result in shoulder injuries. This is why shoulders and upper limb injuries are the most problematic areas for boxing. So this stretch here, fantastic for any boxer. However, it's quite hard to do this yourself or to find somebody willing and able to stretch you out like this. So there's a few different drills that you can do to help improve thoracic extension, such as quadruped press, quadruped extensions, thoracic extensions on the foam roller. Probably start off with these first before seeking out a therapist. This is a fantastic move and showing really impressive strength for overhead strength and stability, core strength, and hip flexor strength and movement as well. This exercise is really advanced, so if you're trying to replicate this, I'd follow these tips to make sure that you can get the same amount of benefits without putting yourself at risk. So what he's doing here is an overhead march with kettlebells with bands on it. The bands with the kettlebells attached creates like a chaotic environment and creating like more proprioception work. And proprioception is where your muscles are having to engage to chaotic environments. So we'd often do this at Boxing Science when we're doing like core training to really switch on and activate the core, and also to do it when we're doing overhead pressing. So really similar to what Spence is doing here. We do a chaotic overhead press. Basically, it's challenging that overhead shoulder stability. Spence in this exercise is doing that all at once. By doing a march, is getting his core involved, overhead stability, and also switching on them hip flexors as well. What I would say about his technique here, it is a little bit rushed. I would like to see him perform this a little bit lighter to make sure that he's getting that leg up at 90 degrees. He's not flaring out with his knee. It's within control. It seems like he's doing it really heavy and the technique is faltering just a little bit. If you're wanting to work yourself up to this, perform the seated overhead chaotic press. This is a really good starting tool, and then progress to overhead march, maybe just like with a static weight load. You can perform this with kettlebells or maybe just like a bar, and then you can progress into this full range motion where you're attaching the bands at the end. And I'd start quite light. I'd even go to 2.5. I don't know what he's using here. Looks maybe even like 12 kilos, maybe even 20 kilos on each side. I'd be starting very, very light to start off with, get that technique right first, and then progress into this really impressive exercise. Looks like Spence is looking to try and strengthen legs here by performing lunges with a bodyweight vest on and loading up the dumbbells on the shoulders. Now, this can be a good tool and also it can be a counterproductive tool to do. The reason why we often do bodyweight vests or trying to load up the shoulders during like single leg exercises is that grip strength can limit the amount of load performed during lunges. However, you're missing out on something that you can do to help improve grip strength, which is really important. Boxing is a very complex sport where there's lots of different physical and technical demands. It's quite hard to fit everything in a single strength and conditioning session. We do things at Boxing Science to micro dose stuff like grip strength and rotational strength and core strength to make sure that we're hitting them adaptations quite often during a training session. So doing like lunges or dumbbell step-ups, holding heavy weights in the hands, yeah, we might be able to lift more if it's on the back, but we're also getting more bang for our buck because we're also developing grip strength at the same time. So it depends what kind of training phase are you in. Are you looking to just try and maximize the amount of load to try and improve leg strength? Then this is where you'd use bodyweight vests, or maybe do some barbell single leg work, or maybe even some goblet work as well. If you're looking to try and improve grip strength at the same time, let's get them dumbbells in the hands when performing our single leg exercises. So we're going on to Spence's core work here, and he's performing some banded kind of alternate leg raises. These are fantastic, hip flexion with neutral spine, really working abdominal core strength, and using the bands increases the amount of tension through the core whilst performing this exercise. He's got a good engagement of his core, lower back against the floor. Straight legs is actually working hamstring flexibility at the same time. We do something quite similar, doing the banded dead bugs. It's a fantastic exercise where you perform 8 to 10 repetitions on each side. If you don't have access to the band, you can do something like with the weights in the hands, whether that's a dumbbell or weight plate, but the bands just create that extra bit of tension. So this exercise is some sort of rowing motion. It looks quite hard to do, but what I would say, if you're looking to try and optimize rotational strength and oblique activation, doing it in a sit-up position can be quite difficult to try and maximize the adaptations from the obliques and to transfer into rotational strength and power. Being in this position, this trunk is slightly flexed, so the abdominals are going to be taking over. At Boxing Science, most of our rotational work is done isolating the obliques. Abdominals are still involved, but we're looking at pull-off press, cable rotations, rotational planks, where we're looking for more contribution from the obliques rather than the abdominals. If doing it in a trunk position, you can't get more bang for your buck, so there is a need for this, but at the same time, I'd try and keep them feet fixed in position. You can see with Spence's technique here, his feet are moving side to side. This isn't optimizing activation of the obliques. So having the feet fixed, maybe in a glute ham raise, doing it with bands. So we've demonstrated this before on the Boxing Science YouTube channel, where we're getting our athletes into a supine position, engaging all the core, and then creating some sort of rotational emphasis to try and increase activation of the obliques. Decent exercise here, just a few little tweaks to help optimize the activation of the obliques to then transfer into rotational strength and power. Another core exercise here in a supine position, legs at a right angle and performing bell pullovers. Is using a foam block in between the knees to keep the legs fixed in position. And this is really vital, especially when you're increasing the range overhead to maintain that lower body position. The hip flexors and the core are really having to switch on to maintain the tension and also maintain legs at 90 degrees. What his coach is doing there is making sure that his feet are dorsiflex. This is increasing that kind of tension of the hip flexors and also the core tension. Going with arms overhead, this is increasing the tension through the core, but also is getting a bit of overhead mobility, overhead range, and also activating serratus anterior, which is the puncher's muscle, which is really important for creating that shoulder stability during a punching action. I really like this exercise. Few different variations that you can do. You can do it with foam roller in between. You can do it with bands in between. So maybe like some mini bands around the feet or the knees to make sure that you're pushing knees out and keeping them in line with the hips. And then it's really important to get a training partner or your coach to make sure that you're maintaining this position throughout the rep ranges. So he's performing here an offset reverse lunge with a knee raise. This is something that we do at Boxing Science. What I would say is a little bit unbalanced here. I would be tempted to swap the dumbbell over to the other side to create that little bit of counterbalance. He's doing it quite light here. I'd say that's about 10 kilos. If he went to the other hand, he'd find this so much easier. Being on the opposite side, he's going to be engaging the glute med more. With it being on the same side, it's just allowing Spence's knee to just drift inwards, and this is probably why he's finding it quite unstable at the top. So doing offset reverse lunges with a knee raise. Let's do it opposite arm, opposite leg. This is a fantastic tool to create strong lower body, single leg strength, hip stability, as we're really firing up that glute and glute med. Spence using the Kaiser equipment. It's like a squat pro machine. It creates air resistance, so you can change the resistance on there, and this really creates force and intent during that squatting action. So I see quite a lot of boxers using this now, whether it's on this machine where it's standing or doing the leg press machine, and this is really challenging that rate of force development. These machines are really expensive. I think they probably start around about £10,000. So not many gyms will have the budget to afford one of these. So how can we replicate this? We can do this with loaded jumps, with dumbbells, with a trap bar, anything that can create that speed and intent during it. So what's really good about this is that it's accelerating all the way through the movement. It's creating a lot of speed and intent, but obviously there's an end to this movement. So there is a small deceleration at the top. With the jumps actually leaving the floor, this will help increase acceleration, which will then transfer into gains in rate of force development and lower body impulse that transfers into punching power. So in this clip here, Spence is using plyometrics and using hurdles to create a target for him to be able to jump high. Now this is really good because it creates speed and intent, but sometimes athletes sacrifice the ground contact time. So this is exactly what Spence is doing here, is sticking to the floor before jumping again. When looking at short ground contact time work, such as like pogos, low pogos, and any kind of reactive strength work, looking to try and minimize that ground contact time. This then transfers into fast and forceful actions in the ring, in particular working on footwork. So when we're doing our short ground contact time work, wanting to try and minimize the ground contact time to 200 milliseconds and below. Sometimes we even want it lighter than that and faster than that, maybe even 100 milliseconds to 150 milliseconds. So when we're coaching that, we're not there with a timer. Sometimes we can get the op to jump out and be able to measure ground contact time. From a coaching perspective, this is basically using coach's eye. It sounds just like a clap. So basically an athlete bouncing off the floor and spending as minimal time on the ground when performing plyometrics. You can see in this clip here that Spence is sticking to the floor. So he's losing a lot of energy when performing his plyometrics. If you're in this situation where you're using hurdles, start off with lower hurdles first to make sure that you keep that ground contact time. If you go higher, make sure you're not sacrificing that ground contact time to make sure that you're still producing larger amounts of reactive strength to then transfer to fast and forceful actions and better footwork. So neck bridges is performing this as static stance. So with neck bridges, I'm not a huge fan of, especially when you're going into flexion and extension. This compresses the neck, compresses the spine, and this can end up resulting in short-term or even long-term injuries. The positive thing about Spence here is that it's holding it isometrically. He's just holding it in position. This limits the amount of dangers of doing neck bridges. I would prefer to see him doing it with a band, with partner assistance, to make sure that he's keeping that neutral posture, is working on neck flexion. Boxers are quite strong in this neck flexion anyway. They are basically in this position, quite kyphotic in nature, and it's just strengthening being in this position. Really what it needs to do is being able to resist that flexion, holding it in position, keeping that chin tucked in. And also with neck training, limit the amount of rotational forces. Performing lateral neck holds is really important too. So we've got trap bar deadlifts. Fantastic to see Spence using this, however, not utilizing it in the right way. We're big fans of this at Boxing Science to improve maximum strength, but also work down the force velocity curve and use variations of this to unlock strength, speed, and explosiveness. With this, it looks quite underloaded. It looks quite light, but then the movement looks quite slow as well. So I don't know whether he's performing a large amount of reps on this or he's just going through the motions. It's really important when you're doing your strength training, move the bar as fast as possible. This is what increases rate of force development that can transfer into increases in punch power. To make sure that you're moving the bar as fast as possible, you can give an athlete feedback by using a velocity-based training device, such as the GymAware or the Output Sports, or even just on the phone using a VBT coach to give our athletes feedback on the speed that they're lifting at every single load, whether that's at 80% 1 rep max all the way through to 90%, 95% 1 rep max, to make sure that athlete is being monitored in terms of progression, but mainly is to make sure that they're lifting that bar as fast as possible to optimize the adaptations and optimize the training process. So we've got some press up action going off here. Spence is like getting a really good position in terms of like being on the dumbbells and being on some handles. A lot of boxers struggle with wrist extension due to kind of punching and flexing over. Doing press ups can be quite problematic. Using the handles and being in that neutral position can be quite beneficial in protecting the hands and wrists and also not limiting the amount of force that you can express during a press up action. The negative point about this technique is that it's not getting that full extension during a press up. This is really important for Spence because he's got such long reach. He needs to try and improve and increase the amount of force that is generated right at the end range of the punch. So on his pressing actions, it's vital for him to extend and accelerate all the way through to full extension of the arm. Increase the demand on this by doing it with bands. So a lot of our press ups and pressing actions are done with a small red band to increase the tension at the end range of the lift and also increase acceleration all the way through extension of the arm. It's going to maximum fatigue on this. It's going to get quite tight and sore in his pectorals and anterior shoulder complex, which is already going to be tight already due to his boxing action. So when we do pressing actions, we often leave reps in the tank. We're not going to maximum fatigue levels just because we know that the anterior shoulder complex and the pecs are getting stimulated every day during boxing training. Okay guys, that brings us to the end of this video. Thank you very much for watching. If you've got any questions, leave them in the comment box below. And if you're not a subscriber to this YouTube channel yet, hit the subscribe button so don't miss out on any future content. Looking to do more reacts videos coming up. We've got Mayweather, we've got Pacquiao that are going to be released soon. If you're new to the channel, go and check out our previous episodes where we've got Bivol, Canelo, BF, Golovkin, and also Errol Spence's foe, Terence Crawford. So go and check them out at the Boxing Science YouTube channel. Hopefully see you on the next episode of Boxing Science Reacts.